It's good to be with you this morning. Open your Bibles to Matthew chapter 10. We'll kind of camp out in Matthew chapter 10 for a little bit this morning. For those who have been with us the whole time this weekend, just two more lessons and you guys are free at last. But in sincerity, I really appreciate all the efforts that you guys have made. I recognize that many have been unable to make it all the times due to health or the work or a variety of reasons, or some people who are just out of town and have other obligations that they can't be here. And those are completely understandable. But for those who are able to make it and those who have made it, we are really, really thankful for your attendance. We've been talking for this whole weekend on the topic of servanthood. We looked at two examples of Moses, both of his calling, and then we also looked at one of the aspects of his servanthood that we don't always think about, his relationship with others and his intercession for them. And then we have started yesterday to look at this phrase that is used 3 times by Jesus throughout the New Testament. Here in this phrase is, a servant is not above his master. Jesus either adds to this or kind of changes it slightly in each passage. And there's a tendency when we see a word or a phrase used in a variety of different places to assume that he's always talking about the same thing. But in each of these cases, there is a context that gives flavor and gives meaning and depth to this phrase. So we had looked yesterday in John chapter 13 and verse 16, where Jesus says a servant is not above his master. And directly in that context, he's dealing there with what it means to humble ourselves before others, that there is no task that is beneath us, and there is no person that is not worthy of our service. And whenever we kind of look at some of these things, there's a thing that I try to bring up, and I forgot to over the last couple of days. If we're thinking of intercessing, if there's somebody in your mind that you just want to not pray for, someone that you don't want to forgive, that you want justice or vengeance on, that's the person that you need to start praying for. If there is somebody, as you think about service, if there is a service that you just don't want to do, or someone that you don't want to serve, that's the person and that's the job that you need to start doing. So we looked at that last evening in John chapter 13, verse 6. The next time that this is mentioned is Matthew chapter 10 and verse 24 and 25. Jesus has a little extra to say in this context, that a student is not above his teacher, or depending on your translation, a disciple is not above his teacher, nor is a servant above his master. The third time that this is used is in Luke chapter 6 and in verse 40, that a student is not above his teacher. And during our Bible class time period, we'll talk about this in relation to judging other people. But what we want to do is we want to focus here on Matthew chapter 10, verses 24 to verse 25. That's the main context of our lesson. And I've struggled to figure out, like, where do you back up to catch the context? Because context. If there's any major rules of learning the Bible, it's context. And anytime you pull a passage out of the context and you divorce it from what he has been talking about, you are almost guaranteed to misuse it at some point. So where do you start to start backing up? Because every time I back up, I'm like, oh, I like that too. And you back up a little bit further, you're like, oh, I really like that. And then you keep on backing up, and you're like, well, let's just start back in Genesis eventually and work our way up to Matthew chapter 10. But since I don't have the ability to resurrect anybody, we're not going to preach till midnight and in case if someone dies. So we're just going to keep it brief this morning. And what I would like to do is kind of skim through a little bit of the section, verses 5 down through verse 15. And I want to really kind of focus in verses 16 down through verse 28 or so. Here in Matthew chapter 10, starting in verse 5, Jesus sends out the 12 and gives them instructions. And whenever he sends them out, this is not their final sending. This is kind of midway through his ministry. Jesus has not made it to Jerusalem for the last week. He has not gone through his 6 trials. He hasn't been crucified. This is not Matthew 28. So this is a temporary sending out. He tells them to go nowhere among the Gentiles in verse 5, enter no town of the Samaritans, but rather go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And Paul reiterates this point throughout his lessons. The gospel is first for Israel and then to the Gentiles. And at this point in time, is for Israel. So go to the lost sheep of Israel. Proclaim as you go, saying the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons, and you receive without pay, and also give without pay. Acquire no gold or silver or copper for your belts, no bags for your journey, or 2 tunics or sandals or staff, for the labor is deserving of his food. In whatever town or village you enter, find out who is worthy in it, and stay there until you depart. We're going to kind of skim down into verse 16, and this is where we get into the heart of the context that we're talking about. Jesus warns them in verse 16, behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and be innocent as doves. Beware of men, for they will deliver you over to courts and flog you in their synagogues, and you will be dragged before governors and kings for my sake, to bear witness before them and to the Gentiles. And when they deliver you over, do not be anxious how you are to speak or what you are to say, for what you are to say will be given to you in that hour. For it is not you who speaks, but the Spirit of the Father speaking through you. Brother will deliver brother over to death, and father his child, and children will raise up against parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. When they persecute you in one town, flee to the next. For truly I say to you that you will not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for the disciple to be like his teacher, and it is enough for the servant to be like his master. If you have called me master of it, if they have called the master of the house Beelzebul, how much more will they malign those of this household? So have no fear of them, for nothing is covered that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known. What I tell you in the dark, you say it in the light, and what you hear whispered, proclaim on the housetops. Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both body and soul in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father, but even the hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore, for you are more valuable than many sparrows. Here is this statement in verse 24 and 25. The disciple is not above his teacher, nor is a servant above his master. It's enough for the disciple to be like his teacher, and a servant to be like his master. As we're looking at the context, here Jesus is sending them out, and there's this warning in verse 16 that things are not going to go maybe as you expect them to go. The warning is I'm sending you out in the midst of wolves, and you are your sheep. And so you're going to have to be wise as serpents, and you're going to have to be as innocent as doves. He warns them that life is going to get difficult during this time. He reminds them here that they will be dragged before governors and kings. They will be beaten in the synagogues. That even family members in verse 21 will turn against family members, even to the point of death. And whenever they persecute you in one town, just flee to the next. And then you'll get persecuted in that town as well. And then you'll go to the next town. And then he makes this statement: the disciple is not above his teacher, nor is a servant above his master. Now, if you were with us for last evening, as we looked at John chapter 13, this is a completely different context. Jesus' statement here almost bears no resemblance to what he talks about over there. He is washing the disciples' feet, and he's talking about the love and the service that he has for them. Wholly different scenario here in chapter 10 of Matthew. And this kind of dives into what our mindset is. Like last evening, we had looked specifically at the mindset of the apostles, where they were coming from, and then where Jesus was trying to bring them to. We had talked last night that what you believe about God will shape you into who you are. If you believe God to be something that he is not, then you will be shaped not into the image of God, but the false image that you have made. And the disciples had a false image of who the Messiah was, and it was misshaping them into the wrong image. And the same thing we're going to see here in Matthew chapter 10. So instead of looking at the apostles' mindset, I want to talk about us for a few moments. How do we usually approach the idea of us being servants and followers of God? in relation to what's happening here in Matthew chapter 10. Jason had read for us earlier as Paul writes to Timothy. Paul writes to Timothy, he says, everybody who desires to live a godly life will face persecution, which is a pretty big statement. It's a pretty all-encompassing statement. And we think, well, hopefully not. Hopefully not everyone who desires to live a godly life will face persecution. And then we look over here in Matthew chapter 10, and Jesus says, I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. And we think, well, hopefully not. Hopefully this is not what we're going to have to go through. Because we have this set of ideas, these kind of mantras that we remind ourselves with, we comfort ourselves with. And I would like us to really consider them for a moment. Maybe not all of these are directly applicable to you. If they aren't, then that's okay. We just pass those by and maybe we'll find another one that is. When we think about our mindset, we think of, well, I'm striving to please an all-powerful creator. And if I'm striving to please an all-powerful creator, then he's going to want me to have an easy go with it. If he has all of the power and all of creation, I'm in creation, I'm a part of creation, then surely if I'm trying to please him, then he's going to try to make it easy on me. I got parents, and my parents love me, and they want my life to be easy all the time because they're doting, loving, caring parents. And for those who are parents, you're probably thinking, not always. I want my kids to work. I want them to sometimes have a hard time. But when it comes to God, sometimes that is our mindset. God loves me. I'm trying to please him. He has all the power. Of course, he's going to make my life easy. When we think about our lives as growing as Christians, where we used to be and where we are going to, I'm now working hard to live a better life. I don't want to be the angry person that I was, or the bitter, or the jealous, or the hatred. I don't want to have the cursing, or the drugs, or the drink, or whatever it was that flooded my life beforehand. I'm striving with all my might to get those things out of my life. And if I'm striving to have this better life, then I'm going to be happier as a Christian. Isn't that the mindset we often have? If I'm getting rid of all these bad things that destroy my peace and my happiness, then happiness is always going to be the end result. If I want to do this, I want to be happy and do it. I strive to love everyone around me, just as Jesus has commanded me to love my neighbor as myself. Thing we talked about. I'm doing my best to do this. And so when I go out and I serve other people, they're going to love me back. That's the natural reaction, isn't it? That I have sacrificed my time, my energy. When I get done doing whatever it is I need to do, my back hurts because I've worked harder, my knees ache. The pinch of my shoulder is acting up, but it's worth it because at the end of the day, I have served somebody and they're now going to love me back for it without fail. I'm striving to be loving. What is deserving of that is people love me back. Or I'm striving to be a good citizen who obeys the authorities and gives honor to the emperor, as we are told in Romans chapter 13 and over in 1 Peter. And therefore, I'm never going to have any problems with the government. We are a government of the people, for the people, by the people, and there's never going to be a point in time where in our country, Christians are going to have to suffer for being Christians. And if they do, something has gone really, really wrong with their theology. Or maybe we think I'm part of a church who models itself after Christ. We're not one of those people who follow man-made doctrines, and we don't distort the gospel. We are a part of the one true church. And as such, all the Christians in the church are going to treat me well. That's how life has to be. My good character deserves a good reward on earth, and my good treatment of others deserves good treatment in return. Isn't that sometimes our mindset? Maybe not all of those things, but when we think of what life should be because of what I have done, what I put in is what I get back out. And what I have given is what should come back in return. And who I serve should dictate how I'm treated and how I feel about my life. As we do this mentality in our lives, we also have a mentality of our work in the kingdom. If I'm loving enough in my work, then I can win their attention and their consideration. I don't want to step too far off into an odd tangent. I recognize that sometimes my experiences and other people's experiences do not overlap. And I've always wondered like how much of my personal stories would ever resonate with somebody else. There's this really neat opportunity happening in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, the kind of big sea city that the institutional work has started back in the 60s. And over the last maybe 10, 15 years, a lot of the brethren in that area have been wondering, do we really need to be controlled by Americans? Do Americans need to come in and tell us how to operate our congregations? And this is opening that conversation to, no, you don't need the Americans to fund all your work. You don't need them to build your buildings or pay for your pews, or you don't need them to pay for your preachers, that maybe you can do it on your own. This is a really great opportunity. Not everybody is thinking of, well, let's get rid of the American oversight and let's go back to the Bible. Some people are thinking, well, let's now have oversight over everybody else and we'll become the new Americans who oversee everybody else in Dawn. And some people are going back to, well, let's go back to the Bible and just follow the biblical. And so there's this pull. And so I've been blessed for a couple of times now to go over and to talk about the biblical example of how to use money and how to collect it, and the church leadership and the structure that God has put into the church. And I've gotten to work along some side of really good men who do the same thing. And there's been some differences in opinion on how to present the material. Some have fallen in the camp of, we're going to preach the truth, and people are going to figure out for themselves if they're going to follow the truth or not. And some people have fallen in the camp of, well, if I'm loving and doting and super supportive, then I can win their hearts. And through their hearts, then I can then convince them of the truth. And it falls back to this mindset that if I'm loving enough, I can win their attention. If I win their attention, then I can win their consideration of the gospel. Or maybe we have the mindset in our work that if I'm gentle enough, if I phrase things just the right way, I won't cause offense. I could talk about these delicate issues that have been just boiling our country, but if I say it just right, I'm not going to offend people. Or if I'm peaceful enough, if I'm a peaceful person, I can break down all of their barriers, and then maybe they'll follow me to church if I'm just a really peaceful person. Or if I have just the right tactics, if I can say things the right way at the right moment, and have the right phrasing, then they'll love me in my work. Or if I avoid name calling, that's been a big trigger word for the last 10 years or so. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but sometimes we have a tendency to name drop that, we are the one true church, but fill in the blank for this denomination. We're not like that. And there's this big backlash. Well, I'm trying to bring people from our neighborhood, from my work. And I don't want you to ever say anything negative about a potential denomination that they're a part of, because this name calling is going to just automatically change, it's going to turn their ears off, and they're never ever going to come back if you dare name drop. So if I avoid name dropping and avoid labeling people, then they'll be happy. They'll stay here forever. Or if I'm likable enough, then I can sell the gospel to them. It's my winning personality. I'm vivacious and vibrant, and I'm just effervescent and bubbly, and on all of me is going to sell the gospel to them. And sometimes we have these mentalities, or some variety of these mentalities, that if I am something, if I speak the right way, if I do the right thing, if I put in the right thing, then what comes back is going to be the right thing. I put in good, I get good back. I put in love, I get love back. I put in good work, good return for my labor always comes back. I serve the right God, and God, who is all powerful, will make sure that I'm treated well in return. I'm a good citizen, and the government treats me well all the time. We have this idea of fair, or turnabout is fair play. That I do something and I get something in return. But let's really look here at Jesus's point, working our way starting in verse 16. Jesus is clear about this. I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. That is going to be the fact. What we are going into is not friendly territory. We are going into enemy territory. We are going in trying to win wolves over to sheephood, but they're still wolves. And we're going to have to treat them as innocent as doves. And we're going to be patient and long suffering and caring and kind and gentle and firm. But we're still going to be bitten sometimes. We're still going to be persecuted. And there's no doubt about that. Because we're not giving good to get good in return. We're giving good to those who have been corrupted by sin, hoodwinked by Satan. And sometimes what we're going to get back is nothing but the products of Satan. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. All who desire to live a godly life are going to face that. So as we look here, as we're continuing on into verse 17, verse 18, he says, beware of them. They will deliver you over to courts and flog you in their synagogues, and they will drag you before governors and kings for my name's sake, to bear witness before them to the Gentiles. Now, this is going to, I think, rather specifically to the apostles. All of the things that Jesus mentions will come about in the book of Acts. This is a kind of line-by-line outline of all the things that will happen to the apostles for the sake of the gospel. Direct application of this is going to vary from age to age, from place to place. I think it's going to be really, really hard for us to be dragged before the king, for instance. We can kind of make sure that that didn't happen back in 1776. But up until now, getting dragged before the king is not really a possibility. But the idea of you are going to face persecutions, that people will seek to stop you in a variety of ways. They're going to try to silence those who speak the gospel. That darkness hates the light, always has, and always will. There will not be a time where my brightness is so bright, my light is so lightness, that the darkness is just going to love to eat up all of that light. It's not going to happen. That we're going to sow and we're going to sow and we're going to sow, and only a fraction of what we sow is ever going to produce anything. The vast majority of it is not. And some of it is going to be retaliatory towards us. Keep your finger there in Matthew chapter 10 and turn over to 1 Peter chapter 4. 1 Peter chapter 4. Somebody had given me the challenge a while back to go through the books in the New Testament and to find a book in the New Testament that does not talk about suffering for the sake of Christ. It's a good challenge. And you're going to be searching for a while. You're probably going to come up a bit empty. Almost every single book is pretty direct about this topic. So when Peter writes here in 1 Peter chapter 4, there in verse 12, he says this, beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. Peter knows their mindset. He knows what we as humans tend to think. I'm going to give good, I'm going to get good in return. And if something bad comes back in return, I'm shocked. I'm surprised. I can't believe this. This is something strange. Well, how is this ever happening? So Peter writes, don't be surprised. Don't act as if something strange were happening to you. This has happened to all of the brotherhood throughout all of time. For all those who shine forth the light of Christ in the darkness of the community around them, there will be those who will be attracted to the light to put the light out. But rejoice insofar as you share in Christ's suffering, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. This is not new, it's not unusual, it's not to be unexpected. This is who we are called to be. We're going back here to Matthew chapter 10. We're looking here in verse 21. He mentions that enemies and persecutions will happen even amongst one's own family. He mentions brother will deliver brother over death, father his child, children will raise up against parents to have them put to death, and you will be hated by all for my name's sake. Surely in my own close-knit family, the bonds of my family love, that we're going to be able to overcome all problems of religion, that my family loves each other, and that bond that we have had over the years, whether it's that really close-knit bond that some military families have is you take your family unit from one base to another place, to one deployment to another, and you become self-reliant and so insular and indestructible that surely the divisions of gospel will never come. He says they will. Well, my family is we have this way of talking to one another and working out our problems. And family, blood is thicker than water. And even if there are spiritual problems, we can overcome those or overlook them, and we could just be a family. Divisions are still going to happen. And you're sometimes going to have to make some really hard choices. And I would say that maybe blood's thicker than water, but I think the blood of Christ is a lot more powerful than the blood of man. And we're going to have to make those decisions and allow those divisions to happen naturally. Obviously, we're going to fight tooth and nail to win them back over and to have them become submissive to Christ. But don't be fooled. Even in Jesus' own family, not everyone believed him. Not everyone followed and obeyed. If you think about Mark chapter 2, Jesus is in a crowd, and the crowd is pressing in so tightly to him to hear his teaching. He can't even lift his hand to his mouth to eat. And there's this whisper that comes through the crowd. Your mother and your brothers are outside. They want to talk to you. And then Mark clues us in that they think that he's maybe lost his mind a bit. And they want to bring him back home to restrain the madness, is the idea. Our brother's gone a bit nuts. We need to bring him back home and keep him under the cover and the safety of our household. We don't have to expose all of Israel to his ramblings. The division of gospel is going to happen even inside of families. And your love for your family and the kindness that you show to them and the hospitality and the warmth and all the history is not always going to be enough to keep those divisions from happening. He then continues on here into verse 25. That is enough for the disciple to be like his teacher. It is enough for a servant to be like his master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebul, which is the prince of demons, which has already happened in chapter 9, Jesus has gone about and he has performed miracle after miracle after miracle, miracles that could not be denied. In fact, as you look at the historical writings, the secular writings that go along with the kind of parallel of the Gospels, there is never a single instance of anyone writing that Jesus claimed to do this thing, but we know he didn't do it because X, Y, or Z. Here's a man who was supposedly born blind, but we know the real story. Never comes up. There's never one occasion of someone thinking, no, he didn't do it. So Matthew chapter 9, those who are the enemies of Jesus have to acknowledge he did these miracles. But he did them by other demons. He cast out demons by demons. And this is what Jesus alludes to here. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebul, how much more will they malign those of his household? It's enough for me to be like him in these things. Jesus did not pick fights. He was not abrasive to be abrasive. He didn't come up to someone and just poke them and make them angry just to make them angry. But he did speak the truth, wholly, while being also gentle and firm. There is a historian that describes Abraham Lincoln as being both velvet and steel. That Abraham Lincoln had a way of being smooth about something and gentle, but an unstoppable force of that what he needed to get done was going to get done. And I think that's a pretty apt description of Jesus. That Jesus was never, ever, ever yielding on the truth. But there's a gentleness, there's a peacefulness about it. But he was kind, but unyielding. He was bold while also being meek. And he blended those two things perfectly. And it's enough for me to be like him. Sometimes we think that if persecutions are going to happen to all those who seek to follow Jesus, well, then I'm going to have to go out and seek some persecution. Or we think that, if I'm having to suffer, then I'm going to make sure that I go ahead and get my sufferings in. Because I'm going to poke somebody and they're going to punch me and I've suffered for the name of Christ. But that's not what Jesus did. He stood firm on the truth. He spoke gently, boldly, firmly, unyieldingly, and the gospel did its work. It divided those who were going to believe and those who weren't, those who were going to yield and those who were not going to yield. And it's enough for me to be like my master. And as we look at the verse here in verse 24, the one that we've been kind of focusing in on here in verse 24, a disciple is not above his teacher, and a servant is not above his master. When I'm tempted to act like I can avoid these things, I get into some real problems. And I got to tell you, this has been maybe one of the biggest temptations in preaching over the last 18 years. I can avoid these things. I can avoid offending people. If I'm gentle and nice and kind enough, then all the offense is just going to be smoothed over. I can just glide the gospel right in there, and it's going to be easy peasy, lemon squeezy all the way. It's going to be joy and lemon biscuits and sugar on top, because I can do this really well. When I do that, then I avoid being as truthful as I should. And I think that if I'm just kind enough, if I'm loving enough, then I'm never going to have any backlash. But when I do that, sometimes I'm not as bold as I need to be. I think of the boldness that we see in Paul's actions and his letters. And then whenever he writes to the Christians, he says, you need to pray for me that I may be as bold as I ought to be. That boldness is not a one-time thing. It's not a characteristic that I gain, I never lose. That it waxes and wanes. And there needs to be prayers done on behalf of Christians for them to be as bold. And whenever I'm tempted to think that I can avoid any backlash for the teaching or my beliefs, then I stop being as bold as I need to be. And whenever I think that I can phrase things just the right way and I can wait for the right moment to put this truth in there just to grow in their hearts without any persecution, then I find that I seek to please man more than I seek to please God. Does that make sense? That if my focus is, if I can make them happy in this truth, and I will wait maybe for years to wait for that right moment where I think that they're not going to be angry, when they're not going to hate me, when there's going to be no persecution, then I'm seeking to please them rather than God in my service. I tend to think of my own interest rather than theirs. That my interest is in what I'm going to have to suffer, or the relationship that I'm going to lose, or the job that I may no longer have, or the family vacations or holidays that I won't be invited to anymore, rather than the soul that is in balance in this moment. And I tend to conform to the world's standards of niceness and love, rather than God's standards of niceness and love. Where the world says it's unloving to tell people who are in sin, or these particular sins in this particular era of our life, that these ones are wrong. There's all kinds of other sins that the world is happy for us to denounce. But there's a select group of sins, and it changes every decade or so, of which ones are under the umbrella of our society. But these sins are the untouchable ones. You can't speak against them. You can't post about them. You can't talk about them. You have to sign conformity laws at your workplace. You have to swear oaths, depending on where you work, of I'm not going to talk about these things. I'm going to set these people. All of those things, because this is protected. And then I become conformed to that. Well, if I'm nice, if I'm kind, then I won't do anything against these protected sins. This is why Jesus says the disciple is not above his teacher. A servant is not above his master. It's enough for the disciple to be like his teacher. It's enough for the servant to be like his master. I'm not above being persecuted for the gospel. I'm not above being maligned or mistreated. I'm not above losing friends or family. I'm not above losing my job for the truth. Full stop. Jesus was not above those things. And I will never be above those things. We looked at verses 26 down through verse 31. He tells us in verse 26, have no fear, for nothing that is covered will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known. And verse 28, do not fear those who can kill the body, and not kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy the body and the soul in hell. Inside the same context, Jesus says, don't fear. And boy, is that hard sometimes. He has just told them, you're going to be dragged before governors and kings, you're going to be beaten, put in prison, you're going to face persecutions, you'll be hated by everyone, children will rise up against parents to kill them, fathers against brother, or brothers against brothers, and fathers against sons. That's a world of turmoil. He says, but don't fear that. It's going to happen. And Peter writes, it's not unusual. It's not something that's unexpected, but you can't live in fear of these things. In fact, in this verse, he continues on, rather fear him who can destroy both body and soul in hell. And then there's this beautiful term. He says, fear God, and I don't want to take away anything from that. But then he follows it up that 2 sparrows are sold for 1 penny, and yet God knows even when 1 sparrow falls. He knows the hairs of your head. You are more valuable than they. Sometimes when we talk about the fear of God, and I'm getting off on a slight tangent for a second, we say fear God, and then we immediately go, but fear is not fear. Fear is just a healthy respect. And yet when God speaks to Isaiah, God says, I will be your fear and I will be your dread. I feel like fear is kind of fear when he talks to Isaiah. And when Solomon talks about to his son that we need to fear the Lord, that's the beginning of knowledge, and he continues that theme through the entire book of Ecclesiastes, he has talked about all the things that will happen to you eternally if you do not fear God. I think fear is fear. And when Jesus talks about fear in context of, here's someone who can kill the body, that's not something to fear. But the one who can destroy the soul, I feel like fear is fear. There is a healthy fear of God, that he is bigger and larger and greater than us. I cannot argue against him. I cannot plead my case on my own. I cannot justify my actions. I cannot pay back what is owed. I can't deny him and then expect to walk away unscathed. There is a fear of God that should be instilled in us. But then he tempers that in verse 29 down through verse 31. That God also loves you. He is a God to be feared if you are on the wrong side of him. He is a God of vengeance, a God of justice, but he's also a God of mercy, a God of compassion and love. And we'll talk a lot more about that in our second session. When he puts these 2 ideas together, I'm not above my master. I'm not above suffering for the sake of the gospel. I'm not above being hated for my faith and my belief. I'm not above being persecuted for my pronouncement of the truth in the world around me. I'm not above having other people try to put out my light that I shine. It's enough to be like Jesus in this respect. But I also shouldn't fear. I shouldn't live in fear. I should fear God. But I should also know that he loves me. So just a quick conclusion. I would encourage us to consider asking God to make us servants. Servants who are like our master. Servants who are bold and full of truth, while also gentle and kind. Servants who are more concerned about this others' souls than our social standing. Servants who love others more than ourselves and count others as more significant than ourselves. And servants who do not fear those who can kill the body. There's this wonderful thing that God has baked into who we are supposed to be as Christians. That the world can unleash the worst things that they can do to us. And all that does is this free us back to God. You know, what can the world do if they do all that they can do, and we walk away rejoicing, or we go to heaven rejoicing? And there's fear that falls upon the church that then makes the church grow in boldness and outspokenness in the truth and more joy in the gospel. There's nothing more to it. God has taken away every tool of the world to stop us. And he has turned those tools to things that make us more bold and more zealous and more passionate. And tools that eventually turn into ultimate glorification in heaven. It's a beautiful and a wonderful. As is our custom and our habit, And we'll talk about more customs and habits in our next lesson. We invite you to consider who you have been fearing lately. If you've been fearing the world around you and you have allowed your Christianity maybe to fall into the background, you haven't been as bold as you ought to be. And you have allowed your light to dim because you have been afraid of the ramifications. Then this is a good time to make a commitment in your heart to change those. If you have not submitted to Christ in the first place, if the fear of God has not grown in you to the point of obedience, then now's a wonderful time to do that. If you're unfamiliar with what needs to be done to become obedient to Christ, then ask any one of us after services. We'd be happy to sit down with you ad nauseum to talk to you about those things. If there's anything we can do, let us know as we stand and sing the song that Jared has picked out. Amen.